My beloved child. Something happened that your soulmate was never prepared to discover. They learned the truth about a part of your childhood you almost never talk about. And when the pieces finally came together, they didn't argue. They didn't ask why you never told them sooner. They didn't even know what to say. They just sat there, staring into the distance, replaying every moment they had ever misunderstood about you. And then the tears came. Because suddenly, the person they thought they knew made sense in an entirely different way. Your silence made sense. Your independence made sense. The way you sometimes pulled away when you needed love the most finally made sense. And the hardest part for them wasn't simply realizing what happened to you. It was realizing how many times they had mistaken your survival instincts for something else. Stay with me, because what they discovered first was only the surface. For a long time, your soulmate believed you were naturally strong. You were the person who handled things. When something went wrong, you figured it out. When life became stressful, you found a way to keep moving. You rarely wanted anyone worrying about you, and even when your heart was exhausted, you had a strange habit of saying, "I'm okay." They admired that about you. Maybe they even envied it. They thought you had been born with some unusual ability to carry pressure without falling apart. But now they understand something completely different. You didn't become strong because life was easy. You became strong because, at one point, being strong felt safer than needing someone. That realization hit them harder than they expected. They began remembering the little things. Like the way you hesitate before asking for help. The way you'll struggle alone with something for hours rather than inconvenience another person. The way someone can offer to do something kind for you and your first response is, "No, it's fine. I've got it." Your soulmate used to think that was stubbornness. Now they wonder how young you were when you first learned not to expect anyone to come running when you needed them. And that question broke something open inside them. Don't skip, because the next memory hurt even more. They remembered an argument the two of you once had. Maybe it started over something small. A delayed message. A changed tone. A promise that wasn't kept exactly the way you expected. At the time, your soulmate couldn't understand why it affected you so deeply. They may have thought, "Why is this such a big deal?" They may have told you that you were overthinking. They may even have become frustrated because the emotion in your eyes seemed much bigger than the situation itself. But now they understand. You weren't always reacting only to that moment. Sometimes your nervous system was remembering every other moment when someone you depended on became unpredictable. Every forgotten promise. Every sudden change in mood. Every time home didn't feel as emotionally safe as a home should feel. Every moment when you had to read a room before deciding whether it was safe to speak. Your soulmate remembered how quickly you noticed changes in their voice. How you could sense distance before they admitted anything was wrong. How one quiet, "I'm fine," from them could make you watch their face like you were searching for clues. They once called you sensitive. Now they understand you became observant for a reason. You learned to notice what other people missed because, when you were young, noticing small changes may have helped you protect your heart. And that realization filled them with regret. Not because they believed they could have changed your past. But because they wished they had understood sooner that some of the things they took personally were never really about them. The deepest truth was still ahead. Your soulmate began to understand your relationship with silence. They remembered the times you had something important to say but stopped halfway through. The moments when they asked, "What's wrong?" and you answered, "Nothing," even though everything in your eyes said otherwise. They used to wonder why loving you sometimes felt like standing outside a locked door. Now they realize you weren't trying to punish them with silence. You were trying to protect yourself inside it. Maybe there was a time in your childhood when speaking honestly didn't always make things better. Maybe explaining your feelings led to being dismissed. Maybe crying made someone uncomfortable. Maybe you were told you were too dramatic, too sensitive, too needy, or that you should simply get over it. Maybe no one said those exact words, but you learned the lesson anyway. Keep the difficult feelings quiet. Handle them yourself. Don't become a burden. So years later, even when love arrived and someone genuinely wanted to hear you, part of you still struggled to believe it was safe to speak. Your soulmate finally sees that. And now they remember all the times they said, "Why won't you just tell me what you're feeling?" They wish they had understood that the answer wasn't simple. You weren't refusing to open up. You were learning, slowly, that vulnerability would not be used against you. And there is something else they finally understand. Your need for reassurance was never weakness. This realization brought the tears back. Because your soulmate remembered the moments when you quietly asked questions like, "Are we okay? Are you sure? Do you still want this?" Sometimes you asked directly. Other times you disguised the question. You might have become extra affectionate. You might have grown quiet and waited to see if they would notice. You might have watched whether their actions matched their words. Your soulmate sometimes wondered why one expression of love wasn't enough. Now they understand that when consistency was missing early in life, reassurance can feel like emotional oxygen. You weren't asking to be worshipped. You weren't demanding constant attention. A younger part of you simply wanted to know that love wasn't about to disappear without warning. And when your soulmate realized that, they thought about every time they became distant just to cool off after an argument. Every time they withheld affection because they were frustrated. Every time they assumed you knew they still loved you without saying it. They had no idea that silence might have sounded different inside your heart. They didn't know that distance could awaken an old fear that said, "Here we go again. Someone I love is leaving emotionally, and I don't know what I did wrong." That understanding changed them. But what they realized next changed everything. They began thinking about your loyalty. You love deeply. When you care about someone, you don't do it halfway. You remember details. You defend the people you love when they're not in the room. You notice when something is wrong. You forgive more than people realize. And sometimes you stay emotionally invested long after someone else might have walked away. Your soulmate used to think this loyalty was simply part of your personality. Now they wonder whether part of it came from the child in you who desperately wanted relationships to last. Maybe you spent years hoping certain people would finally become the safe, consistent people you needed them to be. Maybe you learned to give second chances because you knew what it felt like to fear losing connection. Maybe you became the person who checked on everyone else because you remembered what it felt like when nobody checked on you. That thought crushed them. Because suddenly your kindness looked different. Your patience looked different. Even the way you care for people when you're hurting yourself looked different. Your soulmate realized you had somehow taken experiences that could have made you cold and turned them into reasons to become more compassionate. But there was a painful side to that compassion. Sometimes you gave people understanding they hadn't earned. Sometimes you explained away behavior that hurt you. Sometimes you stayed quiet because conflict felt more frightening than disappointment. And your soulmate started wondering whether they had ever benefited from that silence. Had you forgiven them before they truly understood what they had done? Had you said, "It's okay," because you genuinely felt okay? Or because you had spent a lifetime learning how to restore peace quickly? That question stayed with them. They remembered moments when you apologized first, even when both of you were hurting. Moments when you softened your voice while theirs was still sharp. Moments when you seemed more worried about losing the relationship than winning the argument. And for the first time, your soulmate wasn't impressed by your ability to keep the peace. They felt protective of the part of you that had learned to take too much responsibility for everyone else's emotions. They wanted to go back to every version of you that believed love had to be earned through patience, usefulness, silence, or forgiveness. And they wanted to say, "You should never have had to work that hard just to feel safe." That is when the tears became impossible to hide. Because now they could picture you younger. Not as the confident adult standing in front of them today. Not as the person who solves problems, pays bills, keeps promises, and knows how to survive hard days. They imagined a younger version of you trying to understand things that were too complicated for a child. Trying to read adult emotions. Trying not to make anything worse. Trying to be good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, strong enough. And something inside your soulmate broke. They realized the person they love today was once a child who may have needed someone to kneel down, look them in the eyes, and say, "You don't have to carry this." But life kept moving. You grew up. You learned how to function. You learned how to smile. You learned how to become dependable. And because you became so capable, many people never asked what your capability had cost you. Your soulmate is asking now. Not because they want to see you as damaged. Quite the opposite. They are finally seeing the full size of your courage. Stay with me, because this is where regret turns into something deeper. Your soulmate began reviewing their own behavior. They remembered moments when they accused you of shutting down. Times they called you distant. Times they thought your caution meant you didn't trust them. Times they wondered why you couldn't simply relax and believe that everything would be okay. Now they realize trust isn't something you refuse to give. For you, trust may have always been something built through repetition. One promise kept. Then another. One difficult conversation where nobody leaves. Then another. One disagreement that ends with reassurance instead of abandonment. Then another. Your heart wasn't looking for perfection. It was looking for evidence. Evidence that love could survive a misunderstanding. Evidence that someone could be angry without becoming cruel. Evidence that you could say what hurt without being mocked. Evidence that you could need someone without losing your dignity. And suddenly your soulmate knew what they wanted to do differently. They didn't want to make grand speeches. They didn't want to promise they would never make another mistake. They knew that kind of promise wouldn't mean much. Instead, they wanted to become consistent. They wanted their love to become something you could recognize even on ordinary days. A message when they said they would send one. A conversation instead of emotional disappearance. An apology without excuses. A hand reaching for yours after a disagreement. A calm voice saying, we're still okay. We can work through this. They finally understood that healing love isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's boring in the most beautiful way. It's predictable. It's dependable. It's the same kindness on Tuesday that was there on Sunday. It's knowing the person beside you won't suddenly become a stranger because you had one difficult conversation. And this understanding gave your soulmate a new kind of determination. Not to rescue you. Not to erase a childhood they weren't there to change. But to stop asking your old wounds to prove themselves before they deserve tenderness. There was still one revelation left. The one they couldn't stop thinking about. Your soulmate realized that despite everything you learned to protect yourself from, you still chose love. You still opened the door. Maybe slowly. Maybe nervously. Maybe with one hand still holding the lock. But you opened it. You let someone learn your habits. You let them see your bad days. You allowed yourself to care deeply enough that they could hurt you. For someone whose heart learned early that closeness can be complicated, that was not a small act. That was courage. And your soulmate finally understands that every time you let them closer, you were giving them something precious. Trust you had built carefully. Hope you had protected quietly. A heart that had every reason to become unreachable but somehow remained capable of tenderness. That is why they're emotional now. Because what they once saw as walls, they now recognize as doors you opened slowly. What they once saw as insecurity, they now recognize as a heart asking whether love is safe this time. What they once saw as overthinking, they now recognize as a mind that learned to prepare for emotional storms. What they once saw as independence, they now recognize as survival that became strength. And what they once saw as silence, they now recognize as years of words you didn't always feel safe enough to say. But the strongest realization is this. Your childhood may explain some of your wounds, but it does not get to define the ending of your story. You are not only the things that happened to you. You are also the love you chose afterward. The boundaries you're learning to create. The truth you're learning to speak. The help you're learning to accept. The softness you're allowing yourself to keep. And in this story, your soulmate finally sees that loving you isn't about repairing a broken person. It's about honoring a person who survived, adapted, grew, and still found the courage to believe that something healthier could exist. So if they could speak directly to that younger version of you now, maybe they wouldn't try to explain everything. Maybe they would simply sit beside you. They would let you know you didn't have to perform strength. You wouldn't have to be useful. You wouldn't have to keep everyone happy. You wouldn't have to swallow your tears to make the room more comfortable. And then they would say the words you may have needed to hear a long time ago. You deserved consistency before you knew how to ask for it. You deserved gentleness before you learned how badly words could hurt. You deserved to feel protected without having to become your own protector. And none of the love you needed as a child had to be earned. That's the truth that finally makes your soulmate cry the hardest. Because they realize they aren't only looking at the person you became. They're looking at every version of you that fought quietly to get here. And they don't want you to spend the rest of your life proving that you're worthy of staying for. They want to show you, through patience, honesty, consistency, and real effort, that healthy love doesn't disappear the moment you become vulnerable. It comes closer. It listens. It learns. It stays present through difficult conversations. And maybe, little by little, the part of you that once believed you had to survive everything alone can finally discover something new. You can be strong without always being guarded. You can be loved without performing. You can speak without apologizing for having feelings. You can rest without fearing everything will fall apart. And perhaps the most beautiful ending isn't that your soulmate finally learned what happened to you. It's that after learning the truth, they stopped asking, "Why are you like this?" and started asking a completely different question. How can I love you in a way that finally feels safe? Because sometimes the deepest form of love isn't being understood when you're at your best. It's being understood so completely that someone finally sees the hidden child behind your strongest defenses, and instead of walking away, they become more careful with your heart. Your past may explain why you learned to survive. But it does not decide what kind of love you are allowed to receive now. You have already carried enough. And the chapter ahead doesn't have to look like the chapters behind you. This time, love can be steady. This time, your voice can matter. This time, tenderness doesn't have to come with fear. And this time, the person who truly understands your story won't love you less because of what you've been through. They'll finally understand just how extraordinary it is that after everything, your heart still knows how to love at all.